Hello, everybody. This is Dan Jurek, and we welcome you to the Pax Renewal Center uh, podcast video program where we talk with our therapists and our counselors here at the Pax Renewal Center about different topics. Today, I'm excited that we have Jules Arceneaux with us. He's one of our counselors and psychotherapists. And Jules, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Dan. Good to be here.
Yes, it is a good morning. And I'm going to kind of leave it open it to you to kind of introduce yourself,
Great.
kind of your background and how you got here.
Well, as you mentioned, I have just begun, I guess, the last 6 to 8 months here with Fox Renewal. Prior to that, I was working full time at Vermilion Hospital, working in the outpatient program, working mostly with folks with dual diagnoses, meaning a mental health issue as well as a substance abuse issue, which I really enjoyed working with that clientele.
Hmm.
It helped me hone my therapy skills as well as hopefully help them have a little better insight into life. So I've been deeply invested in spirituality for the last 35 years, working in different levels. I believe that spirituality is at the heart of mental health.
Mm.
I believe that as a person, we are all both mind, body, and spirit. And frequently, because the spirit isn't as tangible as mind and body, it tends to be the thing most overlooked. And when I talk
Mhm.
about spirituality, I think a lot of people confuse that with religion.
Mm.
And so I'd like to start by talking a little bit about religion,
Yeah,
kind
please
of
go.
help distinguish the two. Religion, in its radical definition, really is a compound word from Latin, which means to bind together again. And so something was once bound together, has come undone, and now we're working to rebind together those two pieces.
Mm.
And initially, primarily, the place we look at is the human person. We live in this world that has its own values and interests that may be at times in opposition to the human dignity, the human person.
Mm.
And so we oftentimes begin to conform to the world we find ourselves in, and we lose that primary experience of something deeper and more meaningful about our lives.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so religion initially is used as a rediscovery of the inner values or virtues within a person and being able to learn how to live out of those values or virtues in the world in a way that deepens a person's understanding of who they are and what they contribute to life. And
Yeah.
spirituality is simply that process of learning how to live that out.
Mm.
How do I understand those values or virtues within me in a way that I can then live them in the environment, the situations that I find myself.
So I'm a client, and I say I'm really a spiritual person. I'm not religious.
And I would understand that as I'm not associated with any denomination or religious practice
I
as
don't
far
feel bound together.
well, but by the very virtue of you being in my office, there's obviously some
Bind.
connection to disconnection within yourself, but
Mm.
you're not attached to a community of faith.
Mm.
And I think religion, as far as community is concerned, is about finding like minded people who are striving for those same values or virtues that I strive for, coming together with them in a meaningful way to encourage and to help everybody to better live that out. Now, different denominations, different communities may put forth different values or different virtues.
Hmm.
And I'm less interested in your faith denomination than I am about what are your values and
Hmm.
virtues. And so, when a person comes into therapy, you say, well, how is that spiritual? Well, I think there's three ways that we can do therapy. I think the first way is, you come in and, I put on my therapy hat and you put on your patient hat and you tell me your problem and then I tell you how to fix it. And so it's kind of like a role playing relationship,
Yeah.
where I can be this dispenser of information and knowledge to you, um, but that relationship kind of is very limited and short-lived. Then there's an unhealthy relationship where a patient might come in and develop a relationship with, kind of look at me as their father, or try to cast me in a role that they feel they need, in
Mm.
which I'm just not a part of.
Yeah.
Um, so, and from a therapist, I can look at as a client and try to and maybe project onto them a role that is not healthy or true.
Hmm.
And then finally, I think there's the relationship where two human persons come together and are able to share those values, those virtues, share their life in a meaningful way that can encourage and enliven each other in a way to better live out uh, ourselves.
Yeah. So in some ways, that kind of leads us to that connection between spirituality and mental health, right?
Absolutely, because spirituality is not just one part of us, but it is that thing that ties all the parts together.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at depression, now, first off, there's a distinction between clinical depression and what I call regular depression. Now, clinical depression, the human brain can malfunction, and at times we need medical assistance, medications to help us regulate the chemicals in our brains in a way that's going to allow us to function more fully.
Yeah.
Now, that's a little different than regular depression, quote unquote, which everybody experiences from time to time. Could be grief, somebody we love, our pet that we love dies, and there's an outpouring of grief, and that feels sad and depressive, which is normal. And that's a healthy response. But when that healthy response, when we get stuck in it, and we don't know how to process that emotion in a way that's going to be liberating and allow us to grow,
Yeah.
then we come in for therapy to help experience that, because there's something in our spirit that is blocking our return to normal functioning.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
think of the psalmist, "Why so downcast, O my soul?" Is
mm,
that the kind of depression?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Put your hope in God, right?
Yeah, and even like the deer that yearns for running streams. We find ourselves in a place where we're not being able to drink deeply from that spiritual part of us.
Mm.
So what we find ourselves doing is just functioning, and if you just function long enough, you're gonna develop depression. Another thing that triggers depression is anxiety.
Mm.
If a person experiences anxiety for a long enough period of time, they're going to develop depression.
And depression and anxiety usually dance together, don't they?
Absolutely. And anxiety is, certainly I don't want anyone to not experience anxiety, because anxiety is what gets us out of bed in the morning to go to work, to do the things that we have to do in order to live a full life. However, anxiety can also turn into fear when I'm encountering something that is out of my control. I know that it's an important thing, but it's out of my control. And so my anxiety builds and builds and builds until everything is out of my control. And so part of spirituality, I think, is practicing the realization that most things are out of my control. Even a lot of things that I do myself is out of my control. And being able to recognize that I have to surrender things
Mhm.
out of my control to a power greater than myself.
And yet, when most of us feel anxious, we try and get more control over things.
Absolutely.
And so, like I'm even thinking, I had a client this week who said to me, and I just kind of open this up for kind of your continued reflection. She's got so many things going on and they're big. There's a grief in her family. Her job is being really jeopardized because she's got to be home with her kids to do the Zoom thing with school. Her husband's job is always 1 week on, 1 week off. And she says, I'm handling this pretty well. I didn't think this was anxiety. And yet she can barely get out of bed in the morning. She can barely face the next problem. And she's like, well, then I'm just going to push through, but I'm not anxious.
Right. And so how do you make good decisions when you're filled with this fear
Mm,
of the future? Now, I mean, again, thinking about the future is always going to fill a person with a certain amount of fear because I don't know anybody that controls the future.
uh-uh.
And, when we look at the past, which is another source of great anxiety, we look at our past performances and maybe in some respect, and we find ourselves sorely lacking, and we experience this tremendous regret, which is a source of anxiety, you know.
I
But
want I
again,
want to circle back to depression too. I had this thought and just want to get your input. Some people oversimplify the definition of depression as anger turned inward.
correct.
Maybe because that's just another aspect of depression. Can you maybe say something about that? I
Well,
know I'm kind of hitting you off guard, but I just thought of
depression,
that.
yeah, depression is, I think, a feeling of powerlessness, helplessness, um, that you know we come into a situation, um, and we begin to ask ourselves that question: What's wrong with my life? What's wrong with me?
Hmm.
And so I look at this world. I look at my life, and I keep going over and over and over again in my head that there's something wrong with me, that I'm unable to move forward. I'm unable to change this situation. And so that sense of hopelessness or powerlessness can quickly turn into despair. Now,
Why so downcast, oh my soul?
exactly.
I've
And
lost him.
that's, despair is an extreme case of depression. In the 12 steps, the first step talks about powerlessness.
Hmm.
That we admitted that we were powerless over our alcoholism and our lives had become unmanageable. And that's just the first step. And certainly, we have to step back and we have to look at our lives and we have to name the things that we really are powerless over. And then we take step two, which is came to believe in a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
Well,
The
that now brings us to spirituality and addiction, right?
spiritual on addiction, but addiction is, everybody's addicted to something. I'm not just talking about alcohol or illegal substances, but we turn to things in our lives, whether it be eating or watching TV or cleaning house, going to the gym, one of my favorites,
Yeah.
to help relieve all of the emotional stress in our lives. But if it's done too much, then it becomes problematic. But again, I kind of want to circle back around, and
Okay.
I have to get to a point where I surrender things to a power greater than myself. Call it God, you can call it whatever you want. But there is, this world this life that we find ourselves in is far greater than ourselves.
Mhm.
You know, it's bigger than me, and I was not put here to solve everybody's problem, even my own children, my spouse's problem. And so, I can't find peace until I'm able to find a sense of righteousness before God and others. And that biblical understanding of righteousness means right relationship.
Mm. It's about relationship, isn't it?
How do I get into right relationship with God, with others, and with
And
myself?
myself.
And that's going to trigger a little bit of sadness because it's sad to think that when your child reaches the age of 18, they can choose whatever the heck they want to choose,
Hmm.
as good or bad as it is. And
Right.
basically you're pretty powerless over
Right.
that,
And you and I have both experienced parents where the kids are 18, 19, 20, and they're coming to us asking, how do we control this child? How, how do we get power back and influence?
ah,
And the sad answer is
so if you want influence over other people, then you get into right relationship, and it's
right.
more about asking questions than it is about telling them what to do.
That's big.
And
Ask the right questions,
when you
right?
hear somebody asking questions, they're not trying to control you. They're trying to listen to you. The thing that every human person desires the most is to be heard.
Right.
And we're such poor
Right.
listeners.
And to be able to ask a question that sounds something like, help me understand what you're thinking about this. Help
Right.
me understand why you're choosing this, without that judgment, that, as you said, that control, that I'm going to tell you what to think, I'm going to tell you what to feel. um, and there is that powerlessness, almost a stance of powerlessness, huh, for, like, let's say, the parent, when they say, I just want to know how you feel, but I'm powerless to control how you feel.
Yeah.
I'm powerless to know what you think, but I'm also powerless to change what you think.
And I think it's that stance of listening, non judging listening,
Mm,
not judging the person, but really striving to listen to what's going on inside their hearts and minds,
yeah.
gives them the ability to process and discover those virtues and values that are really important.
Well,
And
that's it too. It's kind of a, they've got to discover it on their own. We as parents, we as pastors and leaders, we may have planted the seeds for these people,
yes,
but they've got to find them on their own.
right. But in your own work with couples, trying to teach the spouses to learn how to listen to each other
Right.
is the whole crux of saving marriages.
Hmm.
So you as the therapist really come in as a listening person,
Right.
and just being able to reflect back to them what you're hearing gives them the ability to go, whoa, wait, 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 that's not what I intend. That's not what I'm striving for. It's like,
Right.
okay, so how does your behaviors line up with what you're striving for?
Right.
And to be able to have both spouses be able to do that for one another on in a new way is life changing.
Yeah. And to go with the couples thing, so many couples come into your office, my office, and they want to have the power to change the other.
Right, right. And I think that's where mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness comes in,
Ah,
because I really want to change the way you're feeling, even though I'm not even aware of what I'm feeling. Because anxiety, we tend not to notice anxiety. We tend to try to repress depression, and that comes out as anger or closing down on people. So if the more I'm able to sit there and practice mindfulness or meditation, the more
mhm,
I'm able to really begin to get in touch with what are those things inside of me stirring around? And more importantly, being able just to notice how my brain spins out thoughts that maybe are good or maybe unhealthy, but just to notice the thoughts without trying to judge them,
Right.
but just to hear them and then let them go.
Let's dive a little deeper into mindfulness, because I know that in my experience, I would think in yours, there's a lot of folks of faith that we work with that are almost suspect of mindfulness.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we both
Oh,
understand its need and it's important and it's almost essentiality, and then it's essential.
right.
Say more about mindfulness, maybe to help define it in a good uh, personalistic perspective.
The practice of mindfulness uh, has been around since the first recordings of mankind.
Hmm.
And so we understand mindfulness. There's been, in different languages, there's different words, but I think we use the word mindfulness to get away from words such as meditation or contemplation. Um, meditation, I think, is when we try to focus on one thing. Could be sacred scripture, could be a holy word, could be your breath, but we try to focus on one thing. And by focusing on one thing, then we allow our minds to kind of quiet down from all of the thoughts that might arise, right? I don't think our minds ever close down, even when we're sleeping, it never closes down. But it helps me to just focus in a very quiet, peaceful, non judgmental way on one thing. Contemplation, I think, is entering into silence. How do I just sit there and be silent and just be attentive or mindful of being silent and noticing the brain, noticing all the thoughts, but not getting hooked on the thoughts? A lot of people get upset because they'll try to sit in silence and they then the thought comes up, well, I'm going to kill my neighbor. It's like, oh, this isn't working. It's like, thoughts are thoughts. They're neither good or bad. They're just passing things that the mind creates. The Buddhists have this wonderful phrase. They call it monkey mind, where when you sit in silence, you notice how your brain jumps from one thing to another thing to another thing, and not to get hooked on it, but just to notice and let the thoughts go.
That's
So
so then
mindful,
so then bring that mindfulness back to depression, anxiety, our
right?
addictions,
So
relationships.
mindfulness is more of it's a use of both meditation and contemplation in a way that is going to help me center myself. And I'll say this is probably not a good way of saying it, but center myself in my own um, authenticity.
Mm.
Who am I? What are my values? What is important to me about me? How can I sit there in my life with all of the good things and all of the things that cause stress? How do I sit there and realize that in the midst of all of this, there is this spiritual person, this person who is alive, who has value, you know, who who really is a person that can bring a perspective to the world that is unique and life-giving.
Mm.
I don't have to force it. I don't have to change anything.
No.
Just my very presence here changes everything.
Wow.
And there's that simple acceptance of myself. And so if
Mm.
I can't accept me, then I'm going to work real hard on changing Dan. I don't feel the self-worth inside of me, then I got to earn it by making Dan recognize how important I am. Whereas if I can just recognize, the beauty and wonder of my being here now, I'm less inclined to want to fix everybody around me. I want to help them. I want to help them grow and to experience the good things of their lives, but I don't have to change. What's the difference between preference and necessity?
Mm,
We get if we're not practicing some kind of mindfulness, there is no difference. Putting your bath towel in the right place after you use it is a necessity.
right.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? You're going to divorce over that? Really?
Right. And so this mindfulness can lead to that acceptance that you said,
Right.
which, again, maybe using the 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 great Serenity Prayer leads to serenity, a certain sense of peace.
Absolutely. Again, it centers us, it grounds us, it anchors us. And again, for me, my higher power, I call God, but that sense of God, which is greater than me, is at the center of who I am. And that I can go inside myself in that space where God dwells, where life dwells inside of me. And I can touch that life. And life is beautiful. Life is great. It's the most important thing that I possess. And that living, that part of me really allows me to breathe.
Yeah.
Gosh, so many people walk around today, they don't breathe. There's no deep breathing. They're just, constantly frantic. It's like, gosh. But um, what is our deepest fear?
So then, kind of pulling it back around. There's uh, weed eating going on behind me. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's driving me crazy. um, I'm going to ask this question, kind of pulling it back. This is again, we've talked so much about mindfulness and spirituality, and then depression, anxiety. So, where's mental health's place in all this? Where is the counselor's role and the place in helping people maybe integrate, make distinction, get definition, become mindful?
Well, I think from our perspective, our place can be varied. Somebody may come in and they're just wanting somebody to help them process information in an unbiased way. Dan, I'm thinking about changing careers, and I need to come and talk to you, because I'm really uncertain about what to do, and so we can go through a process of discernment,
Hmm.
help a person clarify. And then there's people that come in, like you said, with anxiety and depression, that really have them feeling stuck, and being able to help that person step back and go, okay, so you know what's happening, and what's that deepest fear? What's the fear inside of you that's keeping you stuck? How do we begin to uh, liberate you from that fear? And I don't mean take the fear away, but contextualize it in a healthy way that doesn't drain you of all your power.
So I hear you going back to this word with all of the things, all the points we hit, fear.
Yes, fear. It's the opposite of love. People think hate is the opposite of love. It's not. It's fear. Scripture tells us very clearly the opposite of love is fear. And so, um, there's this is a whole nother broadcast, but there's a difference between healthy fear and unhealthy.
And what
Now,
we're talking about as counselors is helping people with that unhealthy fear.
correct. And being able to differentiate, between healthy and unhealthy.
Can just, I know we would need a whole nother half an hour, 45 minutes to do that, but maybe in just a minute or two, can you make a short distinction, a simple distinction between healthy fear and unhealthy fear?
I think unhealthy fear, well, healthy fear is um, a fear that is going to motivate us to really pay attention,
Right.
because the one thing I don't want to do is to be unloving towards you, towards myself, or God. I strive to be as loving as possible. Okay, and
Right.
so I'm paying attention to everything that's going on around me in order to achieve a certain level of freedom, in order to choose life. And
So healthy fear also is, for just kind of a different kind of example, I'm walking on the edge of the Grand Canyon high above a mile, right? And
yes,
I'm enjoying it, but there's a healthy fear. I got
yes,
to pay attention to where my feet are going.
it's innate.
Right.
It's
And it's a healthy fear, like you
right.
said. So yeah, that makes sense.
That's a fear for my own self survival. Yes,
Right.
unhealthy fear is when something is going on in my life that is that's creating a perspective that things that are not catastrophic are,
Mm,
or if things are catastrophic, I can't handle it. And
mm,
fear will healthy fear is always showing us a right behavior.
mm.
It's leading us to a right behavior. Unhealthy
Unhealthy fear.
is the opposite, and it always leads us to a place of unhealthy behavior. I feel stuck or frustrated or angry, and I can't make the world do what I want the world to do. And so,
Control.
control. Or depression, or you just close down. Again, unhealthy fear either have to run away, close down, or fight you.
Right.
Those are the only three
Fight or
options.
flight. Right.
Those are the only three options I have with unhealthy fear.
And so we're either reactive in unhealthy fear, maybe responsive in healthy fear, because responsive means we're mindful, we're paying attention, we're staying focused. But that reactive place is just,
Right.
it can run over a train if it needs to.
Yeah. And again, all fear, when you first encounter it, you're gonna have a reactive stance.
Yeah.
But if you're rooted and grounded in your own, your own value, your own virtue, when you're rooted and grounded in the goodness of yourself, that reactive experience is short-lived, and immediately I begin to process in a healthy way.
Mm.
Where if I'm not rooted and grounded within myself, then the only thing I have is, again, fight, flight, or shut down,
Right.
play dead, which are, well, look at the world. Turn on your nightly news
It's fight, flight, or fear,
or shut
or
down, shut
shut
down.
down. Right.
Right,
Paralyzed, reactive.
right. Paralyzed, aggressive,
Mhm.
or,
Well,
right.
just in this last year, uh, um, I would think you've heard it, but I cannot tell you how many friends, family, even some of my clients have said, I just want to go to the mountains. I just want to go to the beach. I want to go to somewhere and get away from all this.
Absolutely.
And that's part of that flight,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it could be. It could also be healthy,
Well,
but
this is more the desperate times and I can't stand what's going on and
and
fear
those
of the election, fear of
and boy, what what a wonderful sign that these people have, failed to make the time necessary to practice spirituality in order to daily come back to that sacred place within you, to touch that that holy emptiness within yourself, to be able to give you that calm center to face the storms of our everyday life.
and just as you say that, our role as counselors is to help you enter into that sacred space,
Correct.
to lead you into it without fear,
Yes.
to explore it, celebrate it, find that space, and turn that fear that is the fight, flight, or freeze, shut down to something that is re- um, responsive,
Yeah.
whether it's acceptance, whether it's changing the things you can change.
Right. And the only other thing you didn't mention was you also help people confront their grief.
Mm,
So often we lose track of ourselves because we're afraid of going into that spot of where we've lost.
Mhm.
And if I experience grief, the profound loss of something or someone in my life, I may lose myself.
Right.
I may find that there is nothing there.
Mm.
And so, yeah, to celebrate who we are and also to grieve the losses in a healthy way.
And Jules, that just takes me to kind of where we are in 2021 in February.
Yeah,
There's still so many people grieving the loss of freedom, grieving the loss of jobs, grieving the loss of loved ones who are either separated by death or separated because of social distancing. There's so much loss right now
yes,
that is almost not defined.
absolutely. We're afraid of looking at it. Right? And again, it always comes back to if I'm not centered, if I can't go within myself and find that sacred space within me,
Mm.
then I'm fearful of the loss. And my life has been so busy, so filled with so many things that when those things begin to fall away, I feel like I don't know who I am. I don't know. There may be nothing inside of me, and
Mm.
I kind of laugh because it's true. You just haven't practiced going into that sacred emptiness inside of
Yeah,
us.
what if I go into the deep well and find there's nothing there?
But you will. You'll find darkness and silence and life.
Right,
That's where we find life.
right.
Native Americans have a wonderful tradition. A lot of their sacred spaces, they dig holes in the ground and build a thatched roof, and they literally go down a ladder to get into the sacred space. And understand that we start from the earth. We start in the womb, in the darkness, and we come out into the light.
Yeah.
And so, how do we practice going back into that sacred primal space within us?
It's almost
Yeah,
like any journey of ascent has to begin with a journey of descent.
absolutely.
You have to go down into the darkness, which is baptism, right? We have to be
Well,
plunged into
all the
the
way to, Genesis, that formless, dark waste. And
right,
out of that darkness, God creates.
right,
And
burst
so,
forth.
right. So, it's important that I become acquainted with the process of creation within me. I get into that darkness, and then I can see God creating my life in this day. Again,
Wow,
that's power greater than myself,
wow.
which gives me the space to breathe.
That's a good, and we could keep going, but that's a good place to stop.
Good, brother. Thank you. Thank you
Well, it
very
was great to have you here. And anybody that needs help in working through a lot of what we've talked about, Jules is here at the Pax Renewal Center. We're all here to help.
Got a great staff.
Yeah, we do. So, okay, Jules, and everybody else, we'll talk to you later. Bye bye.
Peace.